And welcome to the Self-Aware Entrepreneur Show. It's Thursday afternoon, fairly balmy up here in the north. And ultimately, today we've got another amazing guest for you. We're going to be discussing elements around burnout. Where does that fuse into kindness? How can years of therapy give you insight on how we can actually make a significant difference to the world? And how, ultimately, is the entrepreneurial journey an increasing self-awareness and relationship with self increasingly important in these uncertain, turbulent times that we live in. And joining me today is the wonderful Anna Pinkerton. And me and Anna have chatted for hours about a lot of different aspects. You know, we agree on a lot of stuff, which is great. We have our occasional moments where we don't agree on things, and then we have a proper critically thought out discussion about those and realise that we were probably closer than we originally thought we were. But Anna has, almost 30 years experience in therapy, but she's also worked in leadership development. She's going to be very soon an author of a really interesting methodology that I want you to, definitely take a look at, because, I firmly believe that it can make a significant difference in people's lives, and is a slight step away from a lot of the things that we traditionally believe. But ultimately, Anna has worked with, a range of companies from FTSE 100 to Fortune 500. She's been published in a number of publications, talking to the BBC, magazines and newspapers from around the world. And ultimately, I consider her to be a really, fountain of knowledge around burnout and trauma, and really able to give us some insight on how to become a more self-aware entrepreneur on that journey. So, Anna, thank you for joining me today.
You're so welcome. What an intro. There's a lot to live up to. Thanks for having me. It's always good to chat.
Oh, yeah. So, Anna, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to at the moment?
Oh, well, I'm working with companies and organizations primarily to help them with looking at the true effects of chronic stress and chronic uncertainty, and how that morphs into adversity and sometimes tips into trauma. So that's kind of partially what I do. Yeah. I also work one-to-one with leaders around the world, where I'm helping them build companionable relationships with themselves, which, simply put, is about how you incorporate kindness into your relationship with self so that you become more stable as a leader. So that's another piece. And also, of course, I've been working on the book for the last couple of months, and one slight rewrite to do this weekend. Not rewrite, just a few amends, really. I think I was over-egging it, saying it was a rewrite.
Yeah, but that process is until you've been through it, it's always quite interesting. And I mean, today you've just got the initial first draft cover designs in. So if that's not that exciting moment where suddenly it just comes to life a little bit, it's just one of those things. It just literally does make you smile inside. And given the work that you do, Anna, obviously this last 18 months has been incredibly uncertain, rather turbulent, and like we just recently spoke about, it doesn't seem to be getting much more stable. So what is your kind of vision for the next 6 months that we're going to face?
Well, I think that it's going to take a long time for us to find any kind of settled. I suspect it's going to be 6 months to 5 years, because I think two things. One is that the uncertainty isn't over yet. So you've got what we would call a very active situation. So you're not talking past tense yet. You've also got the effects of what this last 18 months has done to people, so to us as people and to our brains. So our brains are now on alert to what's coming next. What if I get taken unawares again? Particularly people that have been forced out of work, or they might have lost their businesses or massive chunks of their business. So they're always going to have that somewhat imprinted in them, that this what was already a turbulent time became a devastating time for some. So you've got the experience already had it affect, but also it's not over, if that makes sense. And that matters how we recover or not.
Yeah, and I think that, having people who can kind of help to express that, because what we've had, unfortunately, from a governmental perspective, is very little clarity, a lot of mixed messages, and ultimately no kind of projection on how the future might play out. And that only fuels people's uncertainty. And obviously, we're going to see the effects, the impacts of the last 18 months really kind of follow through. And I've been speaking recently, it's all the way from the babies who've been born in this past year and the challenges they've had around, not seeing, lots of adult faces, not spending a lot of time with other babies, not seeing the, family as much, all the way up to, the older generation who've been isolated more, who've really struggled to be able to see, and, the caregivers that would generally be with them from their own family and from their own, friendship groups. And it's going to impact us all. And obviously, that is only going to start to be shown in time, because there are a lot of acute issues that we're facing, but there's also a lot of longer tail things that we've not even started to consider or talk about yet. But on that note, I want to actually flip back and reflect on the past. So you have a long kind of really career in therapy across a number of different kind of therapies, and being able to really see how things have, impacted the tens of thousands of clients you've worked with over the past, 25 years. And, from your perspective, I want to kind of talk a little bit around the things that you've seen over that time, but also drop in little bits of your own journey and how that's taking you to the work that you do today.
Yeah. Well, what I've noticed, particularly in the last 18 months, is that look, people like to know where they stand and what they can rely on. That's what humans need. So when you were talking about broadcasts about what's going to happen in terms of the restrictions and the opening up, really everyone's watching and going, where do I stand and what can I rely on? That's what we want for us to be able to settle. Okay. Trust. And when we want to be able to trust that broadcast as well. So when we don't get that, our stress goes up a little bit. And so the ancient part of the brain, there's a part of the brain that's that bit like the radar, looking like, what do I need to be worried about? What do I need to be vigilant about? And of course, we're all looking to be able to go, oh, phew, now that's passed and now we're in recovery. So we're not getting that. So again, we get fed on a fairly regular basis that we're still in an active situation. Now, the effects of that are that somewhat ordinary life is still happening for people. Like you said, people are having children, they're divorcing, they're having affairs, they're starting new businesses, they're doing all of what was happening. So they've got there's still all these multiple things, and then you've got COVID and your reactions to that. So of course people are rather discombobulated, as you'd imagine, and I don't think there's a one thing that's happening. I suppose if you were to broaden it, would be uncertainty, and that leads to adversity. Now, the biggest issue for us is how long the uncertainty is going to be there that will turn into adversity, and then we need to be really cognizant of how that ever tips into trauma for people. Yeah, and the worst mix altogether is when you get despair and isolation. Yeah. Excuse me. I don't know why I've got a croaky voice today of all days. Excuse me. But, that's a toxic mix. And that's when people feel incredibly lonely. They think about hurting themselves or even taking their own lives. So despair and isolation is where we want what we want to avoid. And of course, last year, the isolation was incredibly dangerous for some. Yeah.
No, and it's fully understanding that, and that tends to almost form a cycle that continues to make people feel like ultimately despairing and not feeling valid of actually going out and breaking that isolation, because their own value and feeling of worth starts to reduce. So again, like kind of seeing that, Anna, and being very, aware of that, kind of let's dig in a little bit to your own journey. So obviously you've had, a really interesting journey yourself that's brought you to become really passionate about this work and really decide to actually say, I want to create a methodology to bring together all the different things that I've seen from my entrepreneurial journey, from my therapeutic journey, and from all the clients that I've worked with, trying to really take those, small snippets to build something that goes end to end. So tell us a little bit about, young Anna, and then how that's kind of, entered into the journey and where you got to today.
Well, There's a story. I mean, this book is very much a crystallization of what I've learned over practicing a methodology that I designed around 9 years ago.
Yeah.
So once I had practiced it on myself, and this was a marriage of my personal and professional coming together.
Yeah.
That was very David Brent, wasn't it? So it was that coming together. And then I started using, it sounds awful, I started sharing the methodology with clients and helping them wire out what I call inner brutality, where you would brutalize yourself, you'd be mean. Some people might call it the inner bully, some people might call it the inner critic. But actually, when I looked into it's pretty extreme for quite a lot of people. And I figured that 93%, well, I went through all my diaries and my notes, and I thought 93% of anybody that I worked with had this high level of brutality. And obviously it's self-selecting, but I thought that's actually really high. So if we were to deal with that, maybe we're onto something. So it was 10 years ago now that I had a breakdown, and I ended up with post-traumatic stress myself. And I was really very, very poorly for a year. And then I started to, I was brutalizing myself because I felt like I'd made this whacking mistake in life, which I had, but I wouldn't forgive myself, and I'd continually brutalize myself about, it's almost like I wouldn't allow myself to breathe. I wouldn't allow myself to live. And in fact, I just got to the point where I was in despair, and I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to live either. Yeah. So the young Anna would never have had that kind of psychology. I would have been quite optimistic. There's always a way through something. You can transform all pain. I was very much like that. But this experience in my life hit me so hard that it took all my resources away. So for a long time, I couldn't find anything. Yeah. But funnily enough, something happened one day, and I just said, it must be possible. This can't be my life over. Yeah. Even though I'm in neurological disarray and all, really all over the place and not functioning well, there must be an alternative to this. So I intellectually believed it, but I didn't, in my heart, I didn't believe it at all. I thought, it's not, it's gone, it's over, Anna's gone in a way. Yeah. And so I thought that can't be true. So I need to find the alternative. And I practiced, if I was brutalizing myself, I had to do the exact opposite. Yeah. And then that's where the kindness and companionability came from. So I thought, well, what's the opposite to being brutal? Well, it's kind and companionable. So much more dynamic than compassion, right? Because compassion is passive. Mm-hmm. I can have compassion to somebody across the ocean on the other side of the world, but it's passive. Mm-hmm. I still have it, but you can't. Companionability is dynamic. So then I practiced this for a year. It took a long time for me to rewire unwire, if you like, the brutality and wire in this companionability to self. But I was so determined. And then because it worked and it's continued to work, so I'm now 9 years in. And it works for my clients. And I still get calls, people that have finished the work 3 years ago are saying, I'm still practicing this. It's wired in now. It's my thing. This studies my path in so many demands, particularly last year. That was lovely to hear from past clients who were in the most tumultuous of their years. Yeah. And they were okay, which was lovely.
And that's a legacy, is it not?
Yeah. I mean, that's the power of it, because if you heal yourself and you consistently have that dynamic relationship with you, you're always integrated for a start and not split between you and the brutality. And then you pivot around the core of you. That's why it's so good in leadership, because leadership in any form will always be demanding. Yeah. Right. That's kind of why we like it to some extent. Mm-hmm. But if we do leadership only to be externally referenced, i.e., get our feedback from outside of ourselves, we're putting an awful lot of power outside of ourselves. And I don't mean in results. So a lot of
Yeah.
it's around relationships, behavior, our ability to communicate.
Yeah, and obviously kind of looking at that, you almost in that leadership position become a bit static, waiting for that external reference. And actually, you could be a lot more agile, being actually dynamic in that aspect and not having to wait. And we know that in leadership positions, there's a level of responsibility which generates a level of stress, which can be positive if utilized in a dynamic way, but also that responsibility that generates that, you know, meaning can also then actually be used to, you know, make a significant difference. And, you know, one thing I do want to ask you, Anna, is obviously as an experienced therapist, going into that place where, you know, you actually felt like, well, I can't almost work on myself at that point before finding a methodology that did. How did that actually feel? Because there's a lot of expectation out there that if you're an experienced therapist, then, you know, you can fix anyone. And fix being the, you know, this idea of because people are broken.
I know. Well, it funnily enough, I talk a little bit about this in the book, and what it was like was two things. One, I was terrified, but I was so symptomatic. So I was so out of control of my systems. I was shaking consistently. My heart rate was consistently raised. So I thought that the new me was an incredibly anxious person, and that I never was before. But it wasn't anxiety necessarily, although I had hypervigilance. It wasn't about anything in particular. It was about what happened. So clearly something had been switched on. So I was just in neurological disarray. I mean, I can remember my hair used to move and I'd be like, oh, what's that? But it was because my body was shaking and I felt nauseous all the time. And I would retch, you know, just retch I'll just be walking down through the kitchen or living room or something and I'd just start retching. And I think that was my body trying to expel this agony. But I remember thinking, and this, as weird as this might sound, I can remember thinking, oh my God, what a privilege. What a privilege this is. It sounds bonkers, but I thought, oh gosh, this is post-trauma reaction, if not disorder, because it lasted a long time. You know, I didn't really feel any sense of relaxation until after 2 years. And that was about 10 seconds. I can distinctly remember where I was when that happened. So I was living jangly for a really long time. But I also thought, wow, trauma was my specialism. First of all, it didn't protect me. I thought, you know, and I thought that I would see a bad thing come into my life, and I didn't. And it shook me to my very core, which made me think I've got to work on the very core then. Yeah. Right. So it was like the worst time of my life, without a doubt. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And hopefully that is the worst time of my life, touching wood now. But I can remember thinking all those, I tell you what I felt, a solidarity with everybody that ever had trauma. Yeah. I'd had some childhood trauma that I truly felt that I had recovered from and was in a healing process with, but this just took the Anna away. Yeah. Well,
those adverse experiences are so often moments where people actually suddenly have that like shared human experience and realize that actually, you know, many other people will have been here where I am today. And they are still here, probably in a more positive place because of the challenges that they've gone through. And, you know, sometimes that allows people to actually kind of access the elements of post-traumatic growth from the post-traumatic stress. And that in itself is, you know, something that we're still gradually starting to learn. But obviously you being your first client, Anna, effectively, testing that methodology rigorously on yourself to a point where you suddenly went from such a challenging place to actually really having the, you know, the ability to thrive, and more than anything now thinking I need to take this out because it's life-changing. Can you just give a very quick overview of one particular client who you've used this methodology with, where they were and where it's taken them to over time?
Yeah, without naming any names, although they have given testimonial. So I work with business leaders around the world. And so this person wasn't in this country, and I worked with them for about 3 years altogether. We did 2 years intensively. to wire in the companionability to self, which was a concept he hadn't heard about. But because he was so very dedicated to personal development, like a lot of leaders are, he worked through things that were causing havoc in business and in personal life for him. And he wasn't entirely sure. This is very common, by the way. So leaders would come to me going, I know what the problem is, please can you help? Or they'll go, I'm not sure what the problem is, can you help me find out what it is and fix it? So that, there's two ways. Well, so this person was unable to put their finger on what was going on. And of course, it had a trauma base in actual fact. So made that connection. But actually, with my methodology, the My Kind to Life method, you don't have to drag everything up from the past. What you do is you deal with taking out the inner brutality and wire in the companionability, kindness to self. And then you're so strong and resilient. And life will happen to you, but it doesn't take you down anymore. And also your defense mechanisms that you've built up to deal with your trauma or turmoil aren't poisoning your relationships or your business. And interestingly, no word of a lie, he rang me 3 weeks ago and said for the first time they'd just cleared £1 million profit in the business after everything. And he said he puts it down to the companionability. Having had the worst year last year, you would imagine, for a business, actually became their best. And it was because he said the companionability had steadied his path. So and the reason is that it's true resilience. It gives you from the inside out what you need to sustain you. So this is self-care, with bells on, if you like. This is not looking elsewhere. This isn't a yoga class. This isn't a meditation. All of those have a place, but they don't work unless you do the work inside here. This will take you down. And interestingly, all of the leaders that I've worked with that have kind of graduated the method program, they all say exactly the same. When I ask them, how much energy do you feel you've got back now you're not brutalizing yourself? 30% is the same answer. Everybody said the same. I wish I could have recorded it. So 30% more energy when somebody's already incredibly driven, that's amazing, a massive amount.
Well, yeah, and if we're kind of looking at leaders, then they'd happily take a marginal gain of 1% extra energy, and they'd probably invest a fair bit to get that. So obviously 30%, when you're talking like an elite level of performance already, is absolutely massive. So again, that's kind of like, that's even more like advocating the strategies that you use and this methodology. And really, that 30% extra energy is just the icing on the cake, really, because all of a sudden you can actually be truthfully kind to yourself and actually have, an internal companionability for life. It's not just a quick fix. There's a lot of things out there. Oh yeah, therapy that can sort your trauma in 6 weeks. Bang. And it's like,
it's a nonsense. That can't happen. I know, because I'm a trauma practitioner. I know how long it takes, but it also doesn't take forever. The difference is when you're purposely trying to wire something new in, it has to be that purposeful action until the job is done. So actually it takes people different amounts of time. And also it depends how long it's been there. Often the things that are getting in the way now have been wired in for 20, 30, 40 years or more, right? Yeah. So it will take a bit of time, but once the job's done, it's done.
Yeah.
It's wired in, the whole point.
Yeah.
So, I'm testified all the time. I try to brutalize myself. I see, but I never do. I just don't do that anymore. What I do is I take responsibility for who I am, what I do, and for any mistakes I might make. So because really a lot of our defenses are around covering up our pain. Whereas I just go to the pain, you're over it. Deal with that. That's half an hour. Cry, have the agony, and then you move. Because our job as humans is to move through our experiences, right?
Yeah, so much so, and it's absolutely great. It's kind of here, just there's more about it, and kind of bring it to life. And obviously, this is your 10 years of work that you've kind of diluted, you've perfected, you've shaped, you've cultivated, and you've grown into, this methodology that's going to become, both a book, a program, something that other people can utilize both for themselves and for the people that they work with. So can you tell us, Anna, what's on the horizon for the future?
Well, the nearest horizon is the book coming out in the beginning of November. But actually, at the moment, I'm looking to work with a group of leaders that want to practice this, because I'm fascinated by the concept of that speeding up. Because the whole idea of mastermind is actually mastering of minds. So, and the reason that is not just sharing ideas; it's also speeding up the process. So I would love to see how the My Kind of Life method would, in a small group, speed up that wiring in. That's why group work works. So then where the program's going to evolve is that it's going to be a leadership program. I'm going to be training, sharing my knowledge of the method with coaches. So this would be to augment already what they've got. So coaches often come to me for help where things have got stuck and tricky. And it's nearly always because the inner brutality is in the way of what they're trying to actually do. So if you do that, all of the other stuff comes much more freely and easily. So I'm going to train coaches in it. It's a coaching program as well.
And will that help them in some ways to become more trauma informed as well, do you think? Is there any part of that in there?
Yes, it's very much trauma informed. I look at everything through a trauma lens. I know that I'm a trauma specialist and that's my bag. But if you don't do that, what I say is I look at things with a wide angle lens, which is a trauma lens. And lots of people will look at it through that. And that's not bad, but that's their focus. And if you don't pick up trauma, particularly in leadership, it will contaminate your team, your business, your profit. It doesn't stay in us, you see. Trauma is a contaminant. It's a contagion. It's just we don't know that it is. So part of this program is training leaders to know that their own trauma will affect the person next to them and that person next to them. So it doesn't stay within us. And how fantastic that we can do something about that.
And that's some great advice. And for everyone listening, there'll have been a few points that you'll been able to take away from this insights around both Anna's methodology and some of the thoughts and examples she's given around leadership. Because whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you lead a small business, however you entitle yourself in the work that you do, ultimately it all comes down sometimes to actually your relationship with self. And that's a significant thing that as we kind of look out to make an impact to, all the stakeholders that we're, externally visioning out to, sometimes it's just time to actually go inwards. So Anna, where can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Well, the easiest way to get hold of me is on my email, which is anna@annapinkerton.com. And then my website's just annapinkerton.com, which will soon be changing because it'll have the My Kind of Life stuff in there as well. So just reach out, and LinkedIn as well. That's a good place to find me.
I definitely recommend connecting with Anna, and you'll get to see the book covers that I've seen this morning soon once they've been confirmed. But it's a really exciting time, Anna, and obviously as this methodology comes out to market, I think it's gonna make a real difference to the people that it touches, the people who are able to utilize it on themselves, and the people who are able to pick it up and add it to their skill set to be able to utilize it on others. So I want to thank you, obviously, for taking your afternoon out to join me today. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in and listened to us. We'll be back again next week with some more amazing guests, guests that will really build upon some of the things that Anna's said, complement some of the things, and ultimately make us more self-aware as entrepreneurs, as leaders, and ultimately as human beings. So once again, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next week.